Today we continue in our study in the book of Numbers. We're in my book called The 38 Years of Wandering. And you've often heard the 40 years of wandering. They wandered 40 years in the wilderness. But before this happened, they had already wandered 2 years. So in truth, it's 38 years that they actually were wandering and in the wilderness, truthfully. So we have completed so far. So after this happened, God gives them some information on various things that they need to know when they get to the promised land, which kind of helps them understand that yes, indeed, they're going to get to the promised land. However, it is a big pill to swallow. We have a rebellion of Korah and his allies, and that is basically, hey, we're wandering 2 years in the wilderness in the tents, and now you say we're not even going to get the promised land like you promised us. And so there's quite a rebellion. A lot of people die in this rebellion and the cost of rebellion. But after that happens and all those people die, now Aaron is set up as definitely the high priest by having God do a miracle on his staff. And so that everybody is affirmed that Aaron is the high priest picked by God. Then we had the duties of the priest. Now we're getting down to this is what you're going to be doing. And so it gets more detailed than it has in the past. And we talked for the very first time about the red heifer ritual. The red heifer is a cow. My husband said, well, what's the big deal about a red cow? We have plenty of those. But it's a red heifer with no blemish or defect. So you have a Jewish man coming with a magnifying glass to make sure there's no defect or blemish in that whole skin of the red heifer. And so there's very, very few that ever exist. I heard recently a rumor that there's a red heifer in the land of the Jews, but don't know if that was true. We do know that several years back, 20 years back, whatever, Texas sent several cows from a red heifer type herd. And so Jews have red heifer breed over in Israel, but they have to get that special red heifer with no discoloration at all. So today we're going to be talking about the water of purification, and go ahead and do that here. The water of purification, Numbers 19:11 through 22. This was
That's
actually very important.
Yeah, beautiful picture.
Yeah, I know. The pictures
Beautiful.
are always really nice. Yeah. This was actually very important because if you think about how many people were going to die, 600,000 in 20 years, that's, you can break that down. That's quite a number each day. So they needed to have a way to keep purification of the camp. And so this water of purification was very necessary.
Whoever touches a human corpse will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with the water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then they will be clean. But if you do not purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th days, they will not be clean.
How long is a person unclean if they touch a human corpse?
7 days.
When must they purify themselves with the water made with a red heifer ash?
On the 3rd and 7th day.
There would probably be 2 to 3 people who handled a human corpse once they died. Tending the dead required washing the body, anointing it with oils and spices, and wrapping it in linen, grave clothes. Why was the cleansing from handling of a dead important? Consider that there were 603,550 men aged 20 or older, and considering all will die in the next 38 years, you have an average of 43 deaths a day. This figure only amounts for the adult men counted in the census. If women and elderly, who were not part of the 603,550 military-aged men who die a natural death were included, the daily death toll would be significantly higher, likely exceeding an average of 50 deaths a day. The normal disposal of bodies at that time would be burial, and we would have evidence of that in chapter 20 of Numbers, when 2 famous figures die. Therefore, there'll be a huge amount of burials in the wilderness they are traveling around in. When I wrote this book and this chapter, I was saying to Terry, I said, how is anybody ever clean? because you have all these people dying. They have to have 7 days to be purified. How does this even work? How are they ever able to do all the things they're supposed to do? And he says, this is probably when funeral directors and undertakers came to be.
Yeah.
If the person that is unclean missed the third day to purify themselves, could they just purify themselves on the seventh day and be good?
They will not be clean.
Right. There is no remedy if someone forgot to use the water on the third day. They are simply cut off because they are unclean.
If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. They must be cut off from Israel because the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them. They are unclean. Their uncleanliness remains on them.
What is the result if they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse?
Defile the Lord's tabernacle.
Right. How can an ordinary Israelite defile the tabernacle if they don't purify themselves after touching a human corpse? It is like a cold that transfers from person to person. The defilement transfers from one to another, eventually reaching a priest or a Levite. What must happen to the person who fails to purify themselves?
Cut off from Israel.
Like a person with a cold should quarantine themselves so others don't get sick. Since there'd be several procedures dealing with the death of a person, handling of their things, and preparing for their burial, the timing for the third day would start after the last of the handling of the dead body, not the first day, as you would continue to be contaminated until the body is in the ground. There's a medical explanation as to why handling the dead body would make you unclean or susceptible to disease. A deceased body can still host and transmit pathogens, including bacteria such as tuberculosis, cholera, and gastrointestinal infections, and blood-borne viruses like hepatitis B and C and HIV through contact with body fluids, blood, or feces. Ultimately, these laws, originally spiritual, also provided practical health safeguards for communities without modern medicine, emphasizing that unclean did not mean immoral, but rather medically and ceremoniously restricted until proper hygienic cleansing occurred. So this was their way of keeping illnesses to a minimum.
This is the law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters the tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days, and every open container without a lid fastened on it will be unclean.
Here we are talking of a specific location of a dead body. Where is it?
In the tent.
Is the law the same regarding the length of uncleanliness of a human in this instance as in the general rule of being with a dead body?
Yeah.
However, what else is considered unclean?
Anyone who's in it or enters the tent or every open container without a lid fastened on it is unclean.
Right. Is this law medically correct? Yes. Preventing contagion. The regulation acknowledges that proximity to a dead deceased body poses a health risk. Rotting corpses can spread disease, and modern safe and efficient containing protocols, or PPE, are now used to manage this risk. Contamination risks. The requirement for covering open vessels prevents airborne pathogens, insects, or decomposition fluids from contaminating food and water supplies. 7-day quarantine. The 7-day period serves as a quarantine period, matching the time frame often needed for potential infections to present symptoms. Hygiene and sanitation. The purification ritual, washing hands and bathing, is functionally similar to modern sanitation practices designed to prevent the spread of infections. Much of our COVID, you can see right in here, how it worked, and in much of their attempt to try to keep bacteria at bay, you can see comes from some of this too. But we don't have a red heifer cleansing.
Anyone out in the open who touches someone who has been killed with a sword or someone who has died a natural death or anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days.
These verses list 2 other ways of death. They are
killed with a sword and natural death.
Notice the first words of verse 16. Anyone out in the
open.
Although normally the cleansing of a person who handled the dead body in that time coincides with medical practices today, this one is different, which emphasizes that these verses focus on ceremonial ritual purity rather than medical safety. In present day, we consider it safe to be near someone outside who has an illness or just died because we believe the open air protects us, which I don't know how good that is, but
Yeah.
go ahead and complete number 3.
Anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days.
This also has to do with the ceremonial purity rather than medical safety. Despite the differences, some commentators note that the Mosaic law served to keep burial practices away from residential areas, burial places away from residential areas. Interestingly, the 7-day contamination does not happen with the handling of a dead animal. And we don't need to read that, but in Leviticus 11, 24, 28, it talks about unclean animals, and handling them is not the same issue. So there's obviously some diseases that exist in a human being that wouldn't exist in animals, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure.
I would also think that considering all the butchering they had to do, that would be awful if that was a situation.
Yeah. For the unclean person, put some ashes from the burnt purification offering into a jar and pour fresh water over them. Then a man who is ceremonially clean is to take some hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle the tent and all the furnishings and the people who were there. He must also sprinkle anyone who has touched a human bone or a grave, or anyone who has been killed, or anyone who has died a natural death. The man who is clean is to sprinkle those who are unclean on the 3rd and 7th days. Excuse me. On the 7th day, he is to purify them. Those who are being cleansed must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and then that evening they will be clean.
Ashes from
Excuse me.
Yeah, the ashes from the burn purification offering. What are these ashes made up of again?
Cedar wood, hyssop, however you say it, and scarlet wool.
Right. And then also the ashes from the heifer, I imagine.
Yeah.
What are the what are the ingredients of the cleansing water?
Ash from the heifer and water.
Mm-hmm. How is the cleansing water to be applied?
Hyssop and water sprinkled the tent.
Right. Is this same formula used for both unclean humans as well as material things that are unclean?
Yes.
So this seems more ceremonial rather than actually cleaning, because how can a sprinkle cover everything that might be there?
Mm-hmm.
So who is to do the sprinkling of the cleansing water?
A man who is ceremonially clean.
Yeah.
But if those who are unclean do not purify themselves, they must be cut off from the community because they have defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on them, and they are unclean. This is a lasting ordinance for them.
Just to be clear, if a person becomes unclean due to handling a dead body or bone or grave of a human, the rules to be followed exactly are, go ahead and fill out number 1.
They must purify themselves with the cleansing water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, then they will be clean.
Okay, go ahead and do B, C, and D.
Okay. This cleaning water is made up of ash from a red heifer burned with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool. A clean person takes the hyssop and sprinkles the cleansing water on the unclean person. On the 7th day, the unclean person must purify themselves by washing their clothes and bodies.
Right. If any of these procedures are not followed, can the person catch up?
No.
Those that remain unclean are cut off from the
Israel.
Yeah.
Israel, yeah. The man who sprinkles the water of cleansing must also wash his clothes, and anyone who touches the water of cleansing will be unclean until evening. Anything that an unclean person touches becomes unclean, and anyone who touches it becomes unclean until evening.
Right, this reminds me of when they actually show us what happens, like advertising as far as like Lysol or whatever, and shows us the bacteria of like kids touching everything. And that this was kind of preventing that, because of course they would have no way to know that invisibly the bacteria is still there. And so this is a way to prevent them from all the Israelites from being wiped off the earth. The clean person who sprinkled the unclean person must do what?
Wash his clothes.
Anyone who touches the water of cleansing would be unclean until when?
Evening.
Therefore, even after the cleansing and purifying rituals, they still have to wait until evening before they are considered clean. During the 7-day cleansing process, could you touch anything that would not get infected?
No.
Right. If you, as an unclean person during these 7 days, touched anything and then someone else who was clean touched the same thing, would they then be considered unclean?
Yes.
Much like how our infections and our colds are spread. Although this
Yeah.
ritual was very cumbersome, it did make the disposal of dead bodies quick, and the ritual of cleansing and bathing often, which removed the possibility of diseases running through the camp. Because handling the dead caused such severe long-term defilement, 7 days, it would have been functionally necessary for the community to assign specific people to manage the burials, to avoid contaminating the entire group, which could have rendered them incapable of worship. This may be where our concept of funeral directors and morticians come from, which does make sense to me. What is the prophecy of the red heifer? Now, this was interesting to me. While not a prophecy in the biblical context, modern Jewish and some Christian groups believe a red heifer is necessary for purifying priests in the area to build the third temple, often associating this with the end times events. In recent years, groups like the Temple Institute have sought suitable red heifers, with some shipped from Texas to Israel, viewing the potential sacrifice as a crucial step towards the end times. In Numbers 19, the red heifer's ashes are used to create the water of purification. This water is the only way to cleanse someone from corpse impurity, the spiritual defilement caused by contact with death. Because all people today are considered ritually impure, many believe the third temple cannot be rebuilt or operated until new ashes are created to purify the priests and the site. According to the Masna, which is the written book of Jewish traditions, only 9 red heifers have been sacrificed in all of Jewish history. The influential scholar Maimonides, a well-known Jewish scholar, taught that the 10th red heifer would be prepared by the Messiah himself. For the groups like the Temple Institute, finding a flawless red heifer is seen as a sign that the time is right for the Messianic age to begin. Does the Temple Institute currently have a red heifer? Yes and no. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem currently have several red heifer candidates. These Angus heifers were imported from Texas and are being raised in Israel with the goal of producing a perfectly unblemished red cow for purification rituals in accordance with Jewish law. The heifers are kept at a secure location in Shiloh, managed as part of the mission to prepare for a new temple. We are close. We are very, very close to the end times. That's for sure. All right, crossroad.
Oh.
When handling a dead animal, a person is only unclean until
Evening.
evening. 6, any open
Container.
in a tent with a dead body is unclean. 7, to make the
Water.
of purification, you add the heifer ash to water. 8, on the 7th day, the unclean person has to wash his
Clothes.
11, anyone who touches a human bone or
Grave.
is unclean for 7 days. 1 down. Many of these procedures are similar to
Medical.
practices today. 2, if a person unclean from touching a dead body does not purify themselves this way, they defile the
Tabernacle.
To sprinkle the water of purification, you use
Hyssop.
hyssop, yeah. 5, if someone fails to purify themselves after touching a dead corpse, they must be cut off from
Israel.
9, a person unclean from touching a dead body needs to purify themselves both on the
third,
and the 7th days. 10, how many days is a person unclean from touching a dead body?
7.
So let me get this off here.